Yoga and its mythological roots. Part 1. Shiva the Adiyogi, the first yogi on the Himalayan peak. On the silent peaks of the Himalayas, where snow meets sky and silence stretches endlessly, the figure of Shiva as the Adiyogi, the first yogi, is imagined sitting in profound meditation. Ancient tradition describes him not merely as a deity, but as the primal source of yoga, a being whose body held the rhythm of the cosmos, and whose stillness radiated both peace and power. The story tells that he remained absorbed in meditation for ages, unmoved and complete in himself, until seekers drawn by his presence approached to learn the path he embodied. It was in this stillness that yoga was first revealed, not as a system of exercises, but as a way of harmonizing the self with the vastness of existence. The myth portrays Shiva in two lights, both terrifying and transcendent. As the destroyer, he embodies dissolution, but as the yogi, he embodies transcendence, showing that dissolution is not chaos, but a gateway to the infinite. Legends say that gods, sages, and even demons were awed by the aura of Shiva's tapas, his intense austerity. The fire of his meditation was not directed outward, but inward, burning the illusions of ego and desire. For those who beheld him on the mountaintop, he was not merely a god among many, but a living axis of the universe, the original teacher of yoga, who demonstrated through his presence what it meant to be free while living. The story continues with the gathering of seekers who longed to learn from him. At first, Shiva remained silent, immersed in his inner infinity. His eyes closed, he seemed indifferent to the world, beyond time and thought. Only 7 among the multitude had the perseverance to remain, unmoved by hardship, waiting endlessly for a glance, a word, or a gesture that might reveal his knowledge. These 7 came to be known as the Saptarishis, the 7 sages. For them, Shiva eventually turned his gaze, breaking his silence, and he poured into them the essence of yoga, a science of union that encompassed body, mind, energy, and spirit. What had been infinite silence became a living transmission, birthing the yogic tradition that would flow across ages. Shiva's teachings were not about escape from life, but about expansion. He is said to have explained that yoga was a path of transforming every experience, every breath, into an opportunity to dissolve the boundaries of the self. The Saptarishis carried these teachings far and wide, across the lands and seas, shaping the spiritual heritage of humanity. From this myth, yoga is not seen as an invention of humans, but as a cosmic revelation, whispered from the silence of the Himalayas into the attentive ears of the sages. This mythological framing gives yoga its timelessness, grounding it in divine origin, while leaving it open as a universal practice for all seekers. The image of Shiva as Adiyogi also conveys the dual nature of yoga itself. On the one hand, he is depicted as deeply austere, sitting unmoving in the frozen wilderness, a symbol of absolute stillness. On the other hand, he is shown as Nataraja, the cosmic dancer, whose movements create and dissolve universes. Together, these two aspects show yoga's essence as both stillness and movement, silence and expression, the inward and outward flow of existence. In Shiva's being, the vast paradoxes of life are not contradictions but harmonies. The still yogi and the dancing creator are the same being, teaching that yoga is not withdrawal from life, but a deep embrace of its wholeness. The mythological symbolism extends further when we consider the serpent coiled around Shiva's neck. The serpent represents Kundalini, the primal energy of life, lying dormant within every human being. As Adiyogi, Shiva does not only demonstrate mastery over this energy, but shows how it can be awakened, elevated, and merged with the cosmic consciousness. The crescent moon on his head symbolizes mastery over time, while the river Ganga, flowing from his locks, signifies the eternal flow of knowledge. Each element in the imagery of Adiyogi reflects an aspect of yogic philosophy, embedding cosmic truths within mythic form. Through him, yoga is not abstract philosophy, but embodied reality. For seekers, the legend of Adiyogi is a reminder that yoga is not a system of belief, but a path of transformation. The Himalayas, harsh and unyielding, mirror the inner journey, where silence and discipline are necessary to awaken deeper truths. Shiva's initial indifference to the eager seekers symbolizes the difficulty of the path, the need for patience and perseverance before wisdom unfolds. Only those who endure, like the 7 sages, receive the teaching, underscoring that yoga is not attained by desire alone, but by dedication. The transmission from Shiva to the Saptarishis embodies the guru-disciple lineage that remains central to yogic tradition. The myth also suggests that yoga is not bound to any one culture or era. The sages who received the teaching are said to have traveled across continents, spreading the wisdom of union. Some traditions even link the presence of yogic ideas in distant lands to this primordial transmission. While historical scholarship may debate such claims, mythologically it affirms the universality of yoga, not as property of a region, but as a gift to all humanity. The figure of Adiyogi on the Himalayan peak thus stands as a symbol of a practice that transcends boundaries, inviting every seeker to look inward and upward at once. In the rhythm of Shiva's story, there is also a lesson about balance. His ascetic meditation is balanced by his role as householder with Parvati, his cosmic consort. The union of Shiva and Shakti symbolizes the union of consciousness and energy, the masculine and feminine, stillness and dynamism. Yoga emerges from this union, teaching that liberation is not denial of one aspect of life, but integration of all. The myth reminds practitioners that yoga is not simply about sitting in meditation or performing postures, but about uniting the fragmented aspects of existence into wholeness. Ultimately, the figure of Shiva as Adiyogi embodies the essence of yoga as a lived reality. He is not only the silent teacher of the sages, but the ever-present possibility of transcendence within every human being. On the Himalayan peak, the first yogi revealed that the path lies not in external conquests, but in mastering one's own inner world. The myth endures because it captures a truth that resonates across centuries, that yoga is both a discipline and a grace, a science and a mystery, a human effort and a divine gift. In the silent gaze of the Adiyogi, seekers find the beginning of a journey without end. Part 2. Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras, Philosophy or Mysticism. When speaking of yoga's mythological roots, it is impossible to ignore the figure of Patanjali, the sage credited with compiling the Yoga Sutras. Unlike the myth of Shiva as Adiyogi, Patanjali's story lies between history and legend, shrouded in symbolic imagery and cultural memory. Ancient tradition holds that he was not born of ordinary means, but descended from the heavens as an incarnation of Ananta, the cosmic serpent who serves as the couch of Vishnu. According to the tale, Patanjali fell from the sky into the open palms of a woman in deep prayer, and hence his name was formed from Pata, meaning to fall, and Anjali, meaning folded palms in reverence. This mythological framing already suggests that his work would not be a mere human philosophy, but a transmission of cosmic wisdom clothed in human words. The Yoga Sutras, attributed to Patanjali, are among the most influential texts on yoga. Composed in concise aphorisms, the sutras are like seeds containing vast forests of meaning, inviting interpretation and commentary. For some, they represent a systematic philosophy of mind, mapping consciousness with almost scientific precision. For others, they are mystical signposts, guiding seekers toward liberation beyond intellectual comprehension. This duality is at the heart of the question: was Patanjali a philosopher structuring a psychological discipline, or was he a mystic, offering a sacred path of transcendence? The text resists easy classification, for it operates in both registers, weaving rational analysis with ineffable mystery. One of the central threads of the Yoga Sutras is the definition of yoga itself. Patanjali declares, "Yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind." On the surface, this can be read as a psychological principle. The mind is restless, and its churning creates confusion and suffering. Yoga is the method by which one steadies the mind, cultivating clarity and focus. Yet beneath the psychological reading lies a mystical one. When the mind is still, the self shines in its true nature, which is not merely mental calm, but union with the eternal. Thus, in a single statement, Patanjali presents yoga as both philosophy and mysticism, a discipline of mental mastery and a path to divine realization. The structure of the sutras reinforces this duality. Patanjali lays out the famous eightfold path known as Ashtanga Yoga, which moves from ethical precepts to ultimate absorption in samadhi. The yamas and niyamas, the restraints and observances, form a moral and philosophical foundation. They are practical guidelines for living, ensuring that the practitioner's actions align with harmony and integrity. From there, the steps progress through asana, physical posture, and pranayama, regulation of breath, practices that clearly address the body and mind. Yet as the path deepens into pratyahara, withdrawal of the senses, dharana, concentration, dhyana, meditation, and samadhi, union with the infinite, the territory shifts unmistakably into the mystical. What begins as a philosophy of living culminates in the ineffable dissolution of individuality. The ambiguity between philosophy and mysticism becomes sharper when considering the broader intellectual context of Patanjali's time. The Yoga Sutras are aligned with the Samkhya school of Indian philosophy, which posits a dualism between Purusha, pure consciousness, and Prakriti, material nature. In this framework, liberation is achieved when Purusha realizes its distinction from Prakriti, ceasing to be entangled in material fluctuations. This has a philosophical clarity, almost an analytical detachment, offering a precise metaphysical map. Yet the lived experience of this realization is described in mystical terms: samadhi, absorption, bliss, liberation. The philosophical analysis may chart the territory, but the destination lies beyond words, in a state that can only be tasted directly. Mythological dimensions further blur the line. Patanjali's serpent origin is not incidental but symbolic. The serpent in Indian mythology often represents hidden knowledge, coiled energy, and cosmic balance. As an incarnation of Ananta, Patanjali is connected to infinity itself, suggesting that his teachings were not human constructs, but revelations from the boundless. The sutras thus gain the aura of scripture, their brevity echoing the idea that ultimate truths cannot be elaborated endlessly, but must be hinted at, pointing the way toward inner realization. This mythic framing lifts the text from mere philosophy into a sacred guidebook for seekers. The mystical reading of the sutras also arises from their emphasis on direct experience. Patanjali does not ask the practitioner to accept doctrines on faith. Instead, he outlines a method, a discipline through which one can verify the truths for oneself. In this sense, the sutras resemble a laboratory manual for consciousness. Philosophy may describe theories of mind, but mysticism demands personal transformation. Patanjali bridges both, providing a rationally structured system that nevertheless culminates in transcendence beyond rationality. To follow his path is not merely to think differently, but to become different, to embody the state where the mind's chatter dissolves and only pure being remains. The question of whether the Yoga Sutras are philosophy or mysticism is also complicated by how they have been received across centuries. Commentators like Vyasa interpreted the text with great philosophical rigor, situating it firmly within the intellectual traditions of India. Later commentators, however, emphasize the experiential and devotional aspects, treating the sutras as mystical doorways. In modern times, the text has been approached through psychological and even neuroscientific lenses, with yoga framed as a tool for stress reduction and mental health. Yet alongside these rational appropriations, mystics and yogis continue to revere the sutras as living guidance toward enlightenment. The very adaptability of the text across philosophical, psychological, and mystical readings suggests that it was designed to transcend these categories. At the same time, the Yoga Sutras highlight the tension between discipline and grace. Patanjali emphasizes practice, abhyasa, and detachment, vairagya, as twin pillars of the path. One must persistently train the mind and withdraw from clinging to desires. This sounds like a philosophy of effort and rational discipline. Yet the ultimate attainment, samadhi, is often described as descending like grace, a state not fully graspable by effort alone. Here again, philosophy and mysticism intertwine. One works diligently, but the fruit is beyond control, like the blossoming of a flower after long tending. Patanjali teaches both rigor and surrender, rational method and mystical openness. Another fascinating dimension is the role of faith, or Ishvara Pranidhana, surrender to a higher reality. Patanjali introduces Ishvara, a special Purusha, untouched by afflictions, who serves as a guide for the yogi. Some commentators interpret this as a philosophical placeholder for the ideal self, while others see it as a mystical reference to God. The ambiguity is deliberate, allowing seekers of different temperaments to approach the sutras either as rational philosophy or as devotional mysticism. This openness is part of the genius of the text, ensuring that it does not confine itself to one lens but embraces the full spectrum of human seeking. The brevity of the sutras themselves reflects their mystical nature. Unlike discursive philosophy, which builds long arguments, the sutras are fragments, often no more than a few words. They are designed not to explain, but to provoke, to serve as meditation seeds that blossom within the mind of the practitioner. Their power lies not in their clarity, but in their suggestiveness, demanding that each seeker engage directly, struggle with meaning, and finally discover the truth within. This structure aligns with mystical traditions worldwide, where the deepest truths are never spelled out but indicated, leaving space for direct realization. Ultimately, the legacy of Patanjali and the Yoga Sutras is that of a bridge. They bridge mythology and history, with Patanjali both a celestial being and a sage. They bridge philosophy and mysticism, offering rational structure and mystical culmination. They bridge effort and grace, requiring discipline but pointing to a state beyond control. They bridge the individual and the infinite, showing how a human being, through practice, can touch the eternal. To reduce the sutras to philosophy alone would ignore their mystical power, while to see them only as mysticism would miss their precise rational method. Their greatness lies in holding both together, embodying the truth that yoga itself is the union of opposites. In the end, the question of whether the Yoga Sutras are philosophy or mysticism dissolves, just as the mind's fluctuations dissolve in yoga. They are both and neither, a text born of myth, structured by reason, and pointing beyond both toward liberation. Patanjali's legacy endures not because he provided answers, but because he offered a path, a disciplined journey into the mystery of existence. To walk this path is to discover for oneself that philosophy and mysticism are not separate realms but two sides of the same quest, the quest for truth. And in that quest, the sutras remain a light, guiding seekers across centuries toward the stillness where the self shines in its original clarity. Part 3. Chakras and Kundalini, the energetic serpent within. In the mythological imagination of India, the human body is not seen as merely flesh and bone, but as a sacred field where cosmic energies flow and divine truths unfold. Among the most powerful and mysterious of these inner concepts is the idea of chakras, the subtle energy centers, and Kundalini, the coiled serpent power lying dormant at the base of the spine. Unlike the more structured philosophical approach of Patanjali, the imagery of chakras and Kundalini belongs to a realm where mythology and mysticism intertwine inseparably. At its heart is the belief that within every person lies a latent force, immense and transformative, awaiting awakening. This force, depicted as a serpent coiled 3.5 times at the root of the spine, represents both the bondage of unconsciousness and the potential for liberation. The serpent as a symbol has always carried paradoxical meanings. It is feared as dangerous, yet revered as wise. In Indian mythology, serpents guard treasures, live beneath rivers, and embody primal energy. Kundalini inherits all these connotations. Dormant, it represents the treasure of hidden power within human beings, inaccessible until unlocked by spiritual practice. When awakened, it ascends through the spinal column, piercing each chakra in turn, igniting transformation at every level. This imagery is deeply mythic, for the journey of the serpent is not only physiological, but cosmic. The ascent of energy mirrors the soul's rise from ignorance to enlightenment, from the earthbound to the divine. The chakras themselves are conceived as wheels or lotuses, subtle centers where physical, emotional, and spiritual dimensions converge. Each chakra is described in symbolic language, adorned with specific colors, mantras, and deities. The lowest, Muladhara, at the base of the spine, is the root, grounding the individual in survival and stability. Above it lies Svadhisthana, the sacral center of desire and creativity. Manipura, the solar plexus, is the seat of will and power, while Anahata, the heart chakra, governs love and compassion. Vishuddha at the throat is the center of expression and truth. Ajna at the brow, the seat of vision and intuition, and Sahasrara, the crown, is the 1,000-petaled lotus, where union with the infinite is realized. This ladder of chakras represents not only the architecture of the subtle body, but the stages of inner evolution. The mythological framing of Kundalini's ascent through the chakras adds a narrative richness to the yogic journey. The serpent rises, awakening each lotus, opening new capacities, and expanding consciousness. At each stage, the practitioner confronts not only gifts but challenges, fears rooted in survival, attachments of desire, the arrogance of power, or the illusions of mind. The ascent is both purification and illumination, echoing the archetypal hero's journey told in myths worldwide. Just as the hero battles demons and wins treasures, so the yogi awakens energies and overcomes inner obstacles, moving closer to union with the divine. Shiva and Shakti play a central role in this mythological schema. Kundalini is often identified with Shakti, the dynamic feminine principle, the mother of creation who lies asleep at the base of the spine. Shiva, pure consciousness, is envisioned as residing at the crown in eternal stillness. The ascent of Kundalini is thus not only the awakening of energy, but the reunion of Shakti with Shiva, energy with consciousness, dynamism with stillness. This union is the culmination of yoga, the realization of wholeness where dualities dissolve. Through this myth, the cosmic drama of creation and dissolution is enacted within the individual body, showing how the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. The serpent imagery also ties Kundalini to broader mythological motifs. In the story of the churning of the ocean, Vasuki the serpent is used as the rope to churn the cosmic sea, producing both poison and nectar, destruction and immortality. Similarly, the awakening of Kundalini can bring both peril and liberation. Without guidance, it can unleash chaos in the psyche, but under discipline and devotion, it leads to bliss and transcendence. This duality reflects the ambivalent power of serpents in myth, dangerous to those unprepared, divine to those who approach with reverence. Practices developed around this myth are equally rich. Yogic techniques such as pranayama, bandhas, and mudras are described as tools for stirring the sleeping serpent, directing her energy upward. Visualization of the chakras, chanting of bija mantras, and meditative concentration are all ways of aligning body and mind to the flow of Kundalini. These practices, while grounded in subtle physiology, are deeply mythic in spirit. The yogi imagines the serpent uncoiling, the lotuses blooming, the inner light rising. The journey is experienced not merely as self-improvement, but as participation in a cosmic drama, where one's own body becomes the stage of divine play. The mystical literature of India abounds with descriptions of Kundalini awakening. Saints and yogis speak of inner heat, visions of light, sounds of celestial music, or overwhelming bliss. The rise of Kundalini is said to shatter old patterns of mind, dissolve ego, and flood the being with insight. Yet alongside such luminous descriptions, traditions also warn of dangers, disturbances of mind, physical imbalance, or illusions of grandeur. These warnings underscore the mythological theme that powerful forces must be approached with respect. Just as the hero in myth cannot seize the treasure without courage and wisdom, so the yogi must cultivate purity, discipline, and surrender before awakening Kundalini. The chakras, too, are not merely abstract concepts but living symbols connecting human experience to cosmic order. Each is associated with elements, planets, animals, and deities, weaving together the microcosm of the body and the macrocosm of the universe. For example, the root chakra is linked to Earth and to Ganesha, remover of obstacles, while the crown chakra is connected to pure light and infinite silence. This symbolism turns the yogic body into a mandala, a sacred map of the cosmos. The ascent through chakras is thus not only personal growth, but cosmic realization, showing the yogi that the universe itself lives within. Kundalini myths also highlight the transformative power of energy. Unlike purely intellectual paths, The Kundalini tradition insists that liberation is not attained by thought alone, but by direct experience of energy flowing through the body. This is why the imagery is visceral. Serpents uncoiling, lotuses blooming, fire rising. The language is designed to capture the immediacy of transformation, to remind practitioners that yoga is not abstract speculation, but embodied awakening. The serpent within is not a metaphor to be admired, but a force to be lived, stirring the depths of one's being. Modern interpretations of Kundalini often struggle between psychological and mystical readings, just as with Patanjali's sutras. Some describe chakras as psychological archetypes, stages of human development, or symbolic maps of consciousness. Others insist they are literal centers of subtle energy, real though invisible, accessible through practice. This ambiguity reflects the same tension between philosophy and mysticism, rational analysis and mythic imagination. Yet for many practitioners, the power of the Kundalini myth lies precisely in its refusal to be reduced. It demands to be lived, not merely explained. The endurance of this myth across centuries suggests its deep resonance with human experience. The idea that within lies a dormant power waiting to be awakened, that life is a journey of ascent, from base instincts to divine realization, speaks to a universal longing. The serpent coiled at the spine is both a challenge and a promise, that the finite human form contains infinite possibility, that the ordinary body is a temple of the extraordinary. To engage with this myth is to see oneself not as a passive creature of fate, but as a participant in the cosmic play, capable of rising toward union with the divine. Ultimately, the myth of chakras and Kundalini weaves together body, mind, and cosmos into a single tapestry. It portrays yoga not as escape, but as transformation, not as denial of the physical, but as awakening of its hidden divinity. The serpent within is both fearsome and graceful, demanding courage but offering liberation. The chakras are both symbolic and real, guiding the practitioner from survival to transcendence, from earth to heaven within the self. And the reunion of Shakti and Shiva, of energy and consciousness, reminds us that yoga is not about fragments but about wholeness, where the human and the divine are one. In this vision, the body itself becomes the Himalayan peak, the inner serpent, the Adiyogi's disciple, and the blooming lotuses, the unfolding of eternity. The myth of Kundalini does not merely describe energy. It awakens imagination, devotion, and discipline. It turns the inward journey into a sacred adventure, echoing the timeless truth that the greatest treasures lie hidden within. Thus, the chakras and Kundalini embody one of yoga's deepest mythological roots, a reminder that every human being carries within them a sleeping serpent waiting to rise into the light of freedom. Part 4. Yoginis and Siddhas, the secret yogic masters of India. Among the many mythological strands that weave into the fabric of yoga, few are as fascinating and enigmatic as the tales of the Yoginis and Siddhas. While mainstream narratives often focus on Shiva as Adiyogi or Patanjali as philosopher, the lore surrounding these secret masters reveals another dimension of yoga, its hidden currents, its mysterious adepts, and its connection to both the divine feminine and the pursuit of extraordinary powers. Yoginis and Siddhas stand at the crossroads of history and myth, often difficult to classify as mere mortals or gods. They embody the radical promise of yoga, that human beings, through discipline, devotion, and inner transformation, can transcend limitations and awaken to a state where the boundary between mortal and divine dissolves. The Yoginis, often portrayed as fierce female deities or accomplished women practitioners, occupy a unique space in Indian myth and Tantra. They are described as beings of immense power, guardians of esoteric knowledge, and embodiments of Shakti, the feminine principle of energy. Unlike the domesticated goddess figures who bless from within temples, yoginis inhabit liminal spaces, cremation grounds, forests, mountaintops, where the ordinary world dissolves into mystery. In ancient tantric texts, the yoginis revered as a guide to liberation, but also feared as a force of wild, uncontrollable energy. To invoke the yoginis is to confront not just wisdom, but raw power, reminding seekers that yoga is not always serene, but can be fierce, transformative, and unsettling. The mythology of yoginis is most vividly preserved in the yogini temples scattered across India, particularly the circular, roofless shrines like those at Hirapur and Ranipur Drial in Odisha. These temples are dedicated to 64 yoginis, each with unique forms and attributes, ranging from benevolent to terrifying. Some have animal heads, others wield weapons, still others embody erotic power. The number 64 itself carries symbolic weight, suggesting completeness and the full spectrum of energies. Worship in these temples was not about offering safe prayers, but entering into direct communion with forces that could both elevate and annihilate. The yogini cult underscores the idea that yoga's mythological roots are not only about balance and calm, but also about facing the primal energies of life and death, love and destruction, without flinching. Parallel to the yoginis, the Siddhas represent another stream of yogic mythology. The word siddha means accomplished one, referring to those who have attained siddhis, extraordinary powers through their yogic practices. Legends abound of siddhas who could fly through the air, shrink or expand their bodies, become invisible, read minds, or conquer death itself. While modern interpretations often downplay these stories as metaphorical, within traditional lore they are seen as real possibilities, signs of the immense transformative capacity of yoga. The Siddhas are not remembered as mythic abstractions, but as specific figures, sometimes historical, sometimes legendary, who roamed mountains and forests, often shunning society, but leaving behind songs, teachings, and miracles. Among the most famous are the 84 Mahasiddhas of Tantric Buddhism, a pantheon of masters whose lives blend fact and myth. Figures like Virupa, who stopped the sun in the sky, or Tilopa, who taught through paradoxical actions, are celebrated not only for their powers, but for their radical ways of transmitting wisdom. Their stories challenge conventional morality, showing masters who drank wine, consorted with outcasts, or defied social norms, yet radiated realization. The point was not indulgence but transcendence, breaking attachments to dualities of pure and impure, sacred and profane. In these tales, yoga is revealed not as conformity to rules, but as a path of ultimate freedom, where the realized being lives beyond fear and limitation. Indian Shiva traditions also speak of siddhas, often linking them to the Nath yogis, a lineage said to descend from Matsyendranath and Gorakshanath. These siddhas are credited with codifying hatha yoga practices, emphasizing the body as the vessel of liberation. Stories tell of Gorakshanath meditating for centuries, appearing in multiple places at once, or guiding kings and saints. Their teachings blend the practical control of breath, mastery of posture, awakening of Kundalini, with the mythic, portraying the body as a microcosm of the universe. The siddhas embody the conviction that yoga is not only inward meditation, but a living force, capable of transforming flesh into light. What unites the myths of yoginis and siddhas is their insistence on secrecy and initiation. Both traditions are not easily accessible to the unprepared. They demand initiation by a guru, transmission of mantras, and rigorous discipline. The yoginis reveal themselves only to those who approach with reverence and courage, while siddhis are said to arise only after long austerities and self-mastery. This secrecy adds to their aura, making them figures of both fascination and fear. They embody the hidden side of yoga, the esoteric currents, often overshadowed by more philosophical or devotional narratives. Yet without them, the picture of yoga's mythological roots would be incomplete. The duality of blessing and danger is central here. Just as Kundalini awakening is described as perilous without guidance, so too the Yoginis and Siddhas represent forces that can elevate or destroy. A yogini may grant boons of wisdom, protection, or liberation, but she may also strike down arrogance or impurity. A siddha may bless with healing powers, but he may also confound with riddles or paradoxes, shattering illusions. These myths remind us that yoga is not a linear path of gentle progress, but a fire that tests and transforms, demanding humility and resilience. There is also profound symbolic layer to these myths. The yoginas, as embodiments of Shakti, represent the fragmented energies within the human psyche, from desire to anger to compassion to ecstasy. To worship or integrate the yoginis is to reconcile these fragments, to see divinity in every aspect of one's being. The siddhas, as accomplished masters, represent the ideal of human potential fully realized, demonstrating that mortality itself can be transcended. Together, they sketch a vision of yoga not as a single path, but as a vast landscape, where feminine power and accomplished mastery illuminate the journey to wholeness. The songs of the siddhas, preserved in languages like Apabhramsha and early vernacular dialects, continue to echo this vision. They often speak in riddles, urging seekers to look beyond appearances, to find the divine within the ordinary. A siddha might sing of grinding sesame seeds, to speak of extracting the essence of practice, or of lighting a lamp without oil to point to the inner light. These poetic fragments are as much myth as instruction, designed to shock the mind into silence and open the heart to direct realization. In their voices, philosophy becomes lived mysticism, inseparable from mythic imagination. Meanwhile, the yogini traditions continue to inspire both awe and scholarship. Modern seekers often interpret the yoginis as archetypes of feminine empowerment, celebrating their wild independence and their refusal to be confined by patriarchal structures. Yet their mythic power goes beyond symbolism, reminding us that spiritual transformation demands confrontation with the unknown, the shadow, the fierce as well as the gentle. To invoke the yoginis is to step into the sacred circle, where life and death dance together, where energy itself becomes teacher. The endurance of yoginis and siddhas in India's mythological memory reflects yoga's complexity. Yoga is not only about serenity or ethical living, but also about radical transformation, confrontation with mystery, and awakening of latent power. The yoginis guard the thresholds of energy, the siddhas demonstrate the heights of accomplishment, and together they map a path that is as dangerous as it is liberating. They remind us that the pursuit of yoga is not to remain comfortable, but to be shaken, remade, and ultimately set free. In the end, the myths of yoginis and siddhas are not meant only to be believed, but to be lived. They challenge practitioners to see yoga not as a safe philosophy, but as an encounter with forces larger than oneself, forces that demand surrender, discipline, and courage. The yogini teaches through awe and transformation, the siddha through paradox and accomplishment, and both point toward the same truth, that the human being is a vessel of the divine, capable of awakening to infinite possibility. Thus, within the mythological roots of yoga, yoginis and siddhas stand as secret yet central figures. They remind us that yoga is not merely practice or philosophy, but also initiation into mystery, a dance with hidden forces, a journey guided by masters who walk between worlds. They embody the promise that within every seeker lies both the fierce power of Shakti and the accomplished freedom of the Siddha. To honor them is to honor yoga in its fullness, wild and disciplined, secret and open, human and divine. Part 5. Tapas. Why spiritual fire matters. The concept of tapas, the spiritual fire that burns within, is one of the most profound mythological roots of yoga. In Sanskrit, tapas literally means heat or austerity, and in yogic tradition it signifies the inner discipline that purifies the body, mind, and soul. From the earliest Vedic hymns to the epic stories of sages and gods, tapas is portrayed as the force that grants power, wisdom, and even immortality. It is not an abstract idea, but a lived practice, where renunciation, discipline, and meditation generate an inner heat that transforms. In myth, the greatest rishis and yogis attain their vision not by mere worship but by tapas, the fire of concentrated will, which becomes the fuel for spiritual breakthroughs and cosmic blessings. In the Rig Veda, the earliest layer of Indian thought, tapas is already revered as a cosmic principle. Creation itself is said to have emerged from tapas, the heat of the primordial sacrifice that brought the universe into being. This origin myth connects tapas to the very act of manifestation. Without inner fire, nothing arises, whether in the cosmos or in the individual. Later myths echo this theme by showing gods and demons both performing tapas to obtain boons from higher powers. Through austerity and single-minded focus, they generate enough energy to bend the laws of the world. Such stories reveal how tapas is not only a personal discipline, but also a cosmic force, a heat that changes the very order of existence. The Puranas and epics are filled with figures whose tapas shaped the destinies of gods and men. Vishwamitra, once a king, transformed into a sage by practicing tapas so severe that even Indra, the king of the gods, trembled at his power. Ravana, the demon king of Lanka, obtained his formidable strength by tapas that lasted thousands of years, sacrificing his own heads to Shiva in fire. Parvati, before marrying Shiva, performed tapas in the harsh wilderness, embodying the determination of the feminine spirit. Each story demonstrates that tapas is not passive piety, but active struggle, the burning away of weakness and distraction until only pure intention remains. In these myths, fire is both metaphor and reality. The fire of sacrifice, the fire of the sun, and the fire of inner resolve are all seen as one. In yoga, tapas takes on a more personal dimension. It is one of the niyamas, the observances prescribed in Patanjali's Eightfold Path. Here, tapas does not mean torturing the body, but embracing discipline, training oneself to move beyond comfort and desire. The yogi who rises early to meditate, who restrains the senses, who persists in practice despite hardship, is said to be practicing tapas. This discipline generates an inner heat, not visible but felt, which purifies the system, clears mental impurities, and prepares the seeker for deeper states of concentration. Without tapas, the journey of yoga remains superficial, for it is the fire that tempers the self into strength. Mythologically, tapas is often linked to fire deities. Agni, the Vedic god of fire, is invoked as the carrier of offerings, but he is also identified with the fire of tapas in the heart. Just as Agni consumes wood and transforms it into light and smoke, tapas consumes ignorance and transforms it into wisdom. The yogi becomes like a living sacrificial fire, turning the fuel of desire into the flame of insight. This symbolism makes tapas not only an individual practice, but also a sacred offering to the divine. Every act of restraint, Every moment of concentrated will becomes part of the cosmic ritual where the self is burned into its pure essence. The legends also warn that tapas is not without danger. Too much austerity without balance can lead to arrogance or imbalance. Myths of demons performing tapas often show how the same fire that grants them power can also destroy them if misused. Ravana's tapas gave him strength, but his pride led to his downfall. Similarly, in yoga, tapas is not about punishing the body, but about transforming it. It requires wisdom to channel the fire properly, for uncontrolled heat can burn rather than purify. The stories remind practitioners that tapas must be guided by humility, devotion, and discernment. The image of Shiva himself connects deeply to tapas. In mythology, he is often seen absorbed in meditation, his body blazing with the heat of austerity. His tapas is so intense that it shakes the worlds, yet he is serene, the fire perfectly balanced in stillness. This paradox of fiery intensity within cool calmness defines the yogic ideal of tapas. It is not outward struggle but inward burning, where the distractions of the world are consumed, leaving only awareness. To meditate on Shiva is to understand that tapas is not anger or aggression, but the silent, steady fire of transformation. In the epics, tapas often becomes the tool by which warriors and sages alike prepare for their tasks. Arjuna, before the great war of Kurukshetra, undertakes tapas to please Shiva and earn the celestial weapons he would need. This shows that even the mightiest warrior cannot rely on strength alone. Spiritual fire must guide physical battle. Similarly, sages use tapas not to conquer others but to conquer themselves, to win victories over desire, attachment, and ignorance. The fire of tapas thus bridges the outer and inner realms, ensuring that action in the world is aligned with truth. From a symbolic perspective, tapas represents the necessary friction of transformation. Just as fire refines gold, struggle refines the human spirit. To sit in meditation despite restlessness, to practice restraint despite temptation, to seek truth despite doubt, these acts create an inner heat that burns away what is false. This is why tapas is considered indispensable to yoga. Without effort, without fire, the mind remains clouded. With tapas, clarity dawns, and the yogi becomes capable of holding the vastness of truth. In mythology and practice alike, it is the fire within that makes the path possible. Modern yoga often softens tapas, interpreting it as regularity in practice or mindfulness in daily life. While this interpretation is valuable, the mythological roots remind us that tapas is meant to be intense, demanding real sacrifice and effort. It asks the practitioner to step beyond comfort zones, to endure discomfort for the sake of transformation. The legends of sages burning in meditation for years may not be literal for today, but they inspire the principle that growth comes through fire, not ease. The challenge of tapas remains timeless, urging each seeker to find their own fire and keep it alive. Ultimately, tapas matters because it is the engine of yoga. Mythology shows gods, demons, sages, and warriors all relying on it to transcend their limits. Philosophy identifies it as a core discipline, without which liberation is impossible. Mysticism treats it as the fire that awakens hidden energies and clears the path for union with the divine. Whether seen as literal heat, metaphorical struggle, or disciplined practice, tapas is the thread that ties yoga to its mythological roots. It is the reminder that transformation requires burning, that the self must pass through fire to shine. Thus, in the mythological landscape of yoga, Tapas stands as both practice and symbol, both human discipline and cosmic principle. It teaches that nothing is gained without fire, that the path of yoga is not comfort but purification, not indulgence but transformation. In its glow, the ancient rishis saw visions, the gods granted boons, and the yogis found liberation. Even today, the flame of tapas burns in every seeker who dares to discipline the body, steady the mind, and awaken the soul. The spiritual fire matters because it is the light by which the path of yoga can be seen. Part 6. The 8 Limbs, a Ladder to Enlightenment. When Patanjali compiled the Yoga Sutras, he offered humanity not only a definition of yoga, but also a clear method for attaining it. This method, called Ashtanga, or the 8 Limbs, is one of the most enduring contributions of yogic philosophy and mythology. The limbs are not 8 separate practices to be picked at will, but a ladder, each step supporting the next, leading the practitioner from the outermost layers of existence to the innermost core of consciousness. Mythologically, this ladder is said to have been revealed by sages who themselves ascended it, proving by their lives that the human spirit can rise from ordinary struggles to divine realization. The Eightfold Path thus stands as both philosophy and myth, a map of transformation that links human discipline to cosmic liberation. The first limb, yama, lays the foundation with ethical restraints, non-violence, truthfulness, non-stealing, moderation, and non-possessiveness. These principles echo the vows of great figures in Indian epics and myths. When Yudhishthira in the Mahabharata clings to truth at all costs, or when sages live in simplicity without greed, they embody the spirit of Yama. It is not merely about morality, but about harmonizing with cosmic order, dharma. Without this foundation, the practice of yoga risks becoming an exercise in ego rather than liberation. Myth reminds us that even gods are bound by truth and non-violence, for these are the laws that sustain the universe itself. The second limb, niyama, prescribes observances such as purity, contentment, discipline, self-study, and surrender to the divine. In mythology, the great sages exemplify niyama when they live in forests, content with little, or when they purify themselves before sacrifices. The story of Parvati performing austerities to unite with Shiva reflects tapas, one of the niyamas, showing how discipline channels desire into transformation. Self-study, or svadhyaya, often meant reciting sacred mantras, echoing the myth that sound itself is divine. And surrender to Ishvara reminds the practitioner that yoga is not about personal power alone, but about aligning with a higher reality. The niyamas thus cultivate an inner atmosphere where the fire of tapas can burn steadily without consuming the self in pride. The third limb, asana, is the practice of physical posture. Today it is the most visible part of yoga, but in its mythological roots it was not about athletic displays, but about creating stillness in the body so that energy could rise unimpeded. The sages are often depicted sitting motionless for years, unmoved by storms or heat, their bodies steady as mountains. This steadiness was the original aim of asana, to prepare the body as a temple for higher states of awareness. In myths, when a sage sits in deep posture, the gods themselves take notice, for such stillness generates a fire of concentration that alters the balance of worlds. The fourth limb, pranayama, governs the breath. Breath has always been central to yogic mythology, for prana is not merely air but life force itself. The Upanishads describe prana as the power that animates the gods and sustains the universe. To master breath is to master prana, and to master prana is to touch the essence of life. Myths tell of yogis who could suspend breath for years, entering states where time itself seemed to dissolve. Hanuman, whose name derives from Hanu, jaw, and man, mind, is said to embody mastery of breath, making him strong, swift, and devoted. Pranayama is not only technique but a mythic act of aligning with the very pulse of creation. The fifth limb, pratyahara, is the withdrawal of the senses. In epics and stories, heroes often face trials of distraction, where their ability to remain inwardly focused determines their success. Arjuna's concentration on the eye of the bird, ignoring all else, is an illustration of pratyahara in action. Mythological yogis retreating into forests or caves are not rejecting the world, but training themselves to withdraw the senses from their objects, to reverse the flow of attention inward. It is said that even Indra, king of gods, would test sages with temptations, sending celestial nymphs to distract them. Only those who mastered pratyahara remained unmoved, proving that true strength lies in control of attention. The sixth limb, dharana, is concentration, the gathering of the mind into a single point. In mythology, concentration is portrayed as a force that can summon gods, ignite visions, and bend reality. When sages meditate on a mantra or form of the divine with unwavering focus, their dharana generates so much power that deities are compelled to grant them boons. This concentration is not intellectual effort, but total absorption, where the mind ceases to wander and becomes one-pointed, like a flame shielded from wind. The myths show that dharana is the turning point, where inner discipline crystallizes into vision. The seventh limb, dhyana or meditation, deepens this concentration into continuous flow. In myths, dhyana is described as the state in which sages commune with the gods or merge with the cosmic order. Unlike dharana, where effort is still needed to hold the mind, dhyana is effortless absorption, like a river flowing toward the sea. The Bhagavad Gita describes dhyana as the yogi seated in stillness, seeing the self in all beings and all beings in the self. Mythologically, this is the moment when the yogi ceases to be separate, when meditation dissolves the ego and opens into vastness. The final limb, samadhi, is the culmination of the path, union with the infinite. Mythology often portrays samadhi as the ultimate goal of yogis and sages, the state in which they dissolve into light or merge with the divine. Legends speak of saints whose bodies became radiant, who left no remains but a blaze of energy, or who sat immovable in caves, absorbed beyond return. Samadhi is the answer to the deepest human longing, where the boundary between self and cosmos dissolves, and one experiences the eternal directly. It is not death but transcendence, not loss but realization of the essence that has always been. Together, these 8 limbs form a mythological ladder to enlightenment, uniting ethics, discipline, body, breath, senses, mind, and spirit. They remind us that yoga is not a fragmentary practice but a complete path, demanding wholeness. The myths of sages and gods who lived these limbs give them living power, showing how they operate not only as philosophy but as mythic reality. To walk this ladder is to reenact the journey of countless seekers, climbing from the ordinary to the extraordinary, from the finite to the infinite. The genius of the 8 limbs lies in their universality. Though rooted in Indian mythology, they speak to truths recognizable across cultures. Ethics as foundation, discipline as fuel, concentration as power, and union as goal. Myth transforms these steps from abstract guidelines into living archetypes, embodied in heroes, sages, and gods. Every seeker who follows the path becomes part of this mythic lineage, climbing the same ladder of fire, focus, and freedom. Ultimately, the Eightfold Path endures because it integrates philosophy, practice, and myth into a single vision. It is philosophy because it explains consciousness, practice because it gives methods, and myth because it inspires through stories of those who walked before. As a ladder to enlightenment, it insists that each rung matters, that without the grounding of ethics or the focus of concentration, higher states cannot be sustained. In myth and in practice, the 8 limbs remain yoga's most luminous gift, guiding seekers step by step toward the eternal. Part 7. Yoga in the Epics, When Warriors Meditated. The great Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, are not only stories of kings, battles, and divine incarnations, but also vast repositories of spiritual wisdom. Within their verses, yoga appears not as a separate discipline for recluses alone, but as an essential part of human life, woven into the choices of warriors, rulers, and seekers. Mythologically, the presence of yoga in the epics demonstrates that meditation and discipline were not confined to sages in forests, but belonged even to those engaged in the most worldly and violent duties. The image of warriors practicing yoga, meditating before battles, or grounding their actions in spiritual discipline illustrates one of the deepest roots of yoga, that it is a path meant for all, regardless of circumstance, guiding both the ascetic in solitude and the fighter in the field. In the Mahabharata, yoga finds its most eloquent expression in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna teaches Arjuna the essence of yogic living. Faced with the terrible war of Kurukshetra, Arjuna is paralyzed by despair, unwilling to fight against his kin. Krishna responds not with strategy or comfort, but with yoga. He explains karma yoga, the yoga of action without attachment, urging Arjuna to perform his duty while surrendering the fruits of action to the divine. He describes bhakti yoga, devotion as the path of union, and jnana yoga, the wisdom that sees beyond the transient. The Gita is thus a manual of yoga framed in the midst of a battlefield, showing that even a warrior must meditate, act without selfishness, and see the eternal beyond the clash of swords. Arjuna's dialogue with Krishna makes clear that yoga is not escape, but engagement with clarity. His despair represents the unsteady mind, while Krishna's teachings reveal the stillness that comes from alignment with Dharma. The battlefield becomes a metaphor for life itself, filled with conflict and complexity, where yoga provides the balance needed to act rightly. Arjuna is told to meditate, to fix his mind on the self, to control breath and senses, even as he prepares for war. Mythically, this fusion of the warrior and the yogi dissolves the idea that yoga is reserved for peaceful ascetics. Instead, it reveals yoga as the inner discipline that makes action righteous, whether on the battlefield or in daily life. The Mahabharata also includes other examples of yoga. Bhishma, the grand patriarch, is said to have mastered the power to choose the moment of his death, a city born of yogic control. Lying on his bed of arrows, he continues to instruct Yudhishthira on Dharma, demonstrating equanimity even in pain. His ability to sustain life until an auspicious moment reflects the yogic mastery over body and breath. Similarly, sages like Vyasa appear throughout the epic, guiding kings and warriors, embodying the union of spiritual depth with worldly responsibility. These stories reinforce the idea that yoga is not limited to meditation halls, but shapes the destiny of nations and the conduct of rulers. In the Ramayana, yoga appears in subtler but equally powerful ways. Rama, the hero and incarnation of Vishnu, embodies Dharma through restraint, discipline, and devotion. His long years in exile can be seen as a yogic journey of tapas, enduring hardship without complaint. Hanuman, the monkey devotee, represents another face of yoga, the mastery of prana and devotion fused into strength. His leap across the ocean, his immense power, and his unwavering focus on Rama's name are all framed as fruits of yogic discipline. Hanuman's breath control and his celibacy are emphasized in mythology, making him a model of a yogi who channels energy towards service and devotion. The Ramayana also portrays sages whose yoga shapes the narrative. Vishwamitra, once a king, becomes a rishi through tapas and guides Rama in his youth, teaching him mantras and weapons acquired through yogic austerities. Without this yogic initiation, Rama would not have been prepared for his role as protector. The epic thereby ties kingship and warfare to yoga, suggesting that even the highest worldly duties require grounding in spiritual practice. Sita, too, in her years of captivity, demonstrates the yogic virtues of patience, inner strength, and unwavering devotion, transforming her suffering into an act of spiritual endurance. These epic narratives serve to expand the scope of yoga beyond caves and forests. The warrior on the battlefield, the king in exile, the queen in distress, and the devotee in service all embody different dimensions of yoga. Mythologically, this universality shows that yoga was never meant as an escape from life, but as a way of living rightly within it. Whether one is a ruler or a renunciate, a fighter or a devotee, yoga provides the means to align action with the eternal, to see beyond the play of success and failure. The image of warriors meditating might seem paradoxical, yet it captures the essence of yoga as balance. A warrior without yoga may be driven by anger or greed, but a warrior with yoga fights without hatred, guided by duty rather than impulse. This is why Krishna insists that Arjuna become a yogi, for only then can he act without bondage. The myth thus conveys a profound message that the greatest battles in life are not external, but internal, and only the yogi can fight them with clarity. Meditation becomes not withdrawal from action, but the very source of right action. The epics also hint at the transformative powers of yoga through the stories of sages who shaped the destinies of kings. Their tapas generates energies that rival those of the gods, forcing even Indra to pay attention. In this sense, the warrior's reliance on sages reflects the recognition that worldly power must be guided by spiritual power. Without yoga, action risks becoming destructive. With yoga, even war becomes aligned with cosmic order. The myths thus insist that yoga is not optional but essential for those who hold responsibility over others, whether as rulers, fighters, or leaders. From a symbolic perspective, the presence of yoga in the epics teaches that life itself is a battlefield, filled with choices, duties, and conflicts. The mind is like Arjuna, wavering, while the inner self is like Krishna, offering guidance through yoga. To meditate before action, to center oneself in Dharma, is the lesson the epics repeatedly emphasize. The mythic warriors become archetypes for every human being, reminding us that the real war is not against others, but against ignorance, desire, and fear. Meditation is the weapon that wins this war, not by destroying but by enlightening. In modern times, these epic visions remain profoundly relevant. Life's challenges may not take the form of literal wars, but the inner conflicts of doubt, despair, and distraction remain. To remember Arjuna meditating before battle, or Rama enduring exile with equanimity, is to see yoga as timeless guidance. The mythological presence of yoga in the epics ensures that it is never reduced to postures alone, but always remembered as a philosophy of living. It teaches that warriors, rulers, and seekers alike must be yogis, for only through yoga can action align with truth. Ultimately, the epics reveal yoga as the bridge between the human and the divine. Warriors meditated not because they abandoned duty, but because they needed clarity to fulfill it. Kings sought sages not for miracles, but for yogic wisdom to rule justly. Devotees like Hanuman embodied yoga through devotion that became strength. In these stories, yoga is the hidden thread weaving together action, devotion, and wisdom. To read the epics is to be reminded that every life, however worldly, requires yoga. It is the discipline that makes warriors just, rulers wise, and seekers whole. Part 8. Yoga versus religion. Is it Hindu, universal, or both? The question of whether yoga belongs exclusively to Hinduism or whether it is a universal spiritual practice has animated discussions for centuries, and even more so in the modern world, where yoga has spread across continents. Mythologically, yoga emerges from the soil of India, steeped in the language of the Vedas, the discipline of the Upanishads, and the stories of the epics and Puranas. It is inseparable from the imagery of Shiva as Adiyogi, of sages performing tapas, of Kundalini rising, of yoginis and siddhas guarding secret knowledge. To deny yoga's Hindu roots would be to sever it from the rich mythic and philosophical heritage that gave it shape. Yet, at the same time, the very myths themselves insist that yoga is a universal path, not limited by caste, gender, religion, or nation, but open to every being who longs for freedom. The earliest references to yoga in the Rig Veda are framed within the language of sacrifice, mantra, and cosmic order, central to the Vedic worldview. Later, the Upanishads developed yoga as a method of self-realization, a way of piercing through Maya to recognize the Atman as one with Brahman. These texts are foundational to Hindu philosophy, and they embed yoga within a larger religious framework. Mythologically, gods themselves are depicted as yogis, and sages as conduits of divine wisdom. In this sense, yoga cannot be uprooted from Hinduism without erasing its origin stories. The figure of Patanjali, the teachings of Krishna in the Gita, and the tapas of countless rishis are all Hindu expressions of yoga. At the same time, these very sources stress universality. Krishna in the Gita does not restrict yoga to a particular faith, but offers it to Arjuna, a warrior engaged in worldly duties, and declares that anyone who practices with sincerity, whether through devotion, knowledge, or action, can attain the highest. The sages of the Upanishads speak not to a sectarian community, but to humanity, declaring that the truth realized through yoga is beyond names and forms. Shiva, as Adiyogi, reveals yoga to 7 sages who spread it across lands, mythically suggesting that yoga was meant to flow beyond boundaries. These narratives underline the paradox. Yoga is rooted in Hindu myth, yet it continually transcends the limits of religion. The presence of yoga in other Indian traditions reinforces this universality. Buddhism adopted and transformed yogic practices into meditation techniques, leading to nirvana. Jainism emphasized tapas and meditation as central to liberation. Tantric traditions, Hindu and Buddhist alike, developed Kundalini and chakra systems. Even Sikhism, emerging later, honored yogic wisdom while reshaping it into devotional practice. This cross-pollination shows that yoga was never the property of one sect, but part of a shared spiritual vocabulary across India. Mythological figures like the Siddhas and Yoginis often straddled these boundaries, appearing in Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain lore alike. Yoga thus becomes less a religion than a method, available to all traditions seeking liberation. When yoga spread beyond India, its universal dimension became even clearer. In the 19th and 20th centuries, figures like Swami Vivekananda presented yoga to the West as a science of the mind and spirit, emphasizing its universality. He drew from the myths of Shiva, the teachings of Patanjali, and the Gita, but reframed them as tools for all humanity. Vivekananda insisted that yoga was not about converting to Hinduism, but about realizing one's own highest potential. This echoed the mythic truth that yoga points not to a particular god, but to the eternal self within. In this sense, yoga transcends religion while retaining its Hindu roots, like a tree that spreads wide while anchored in specific soil. The debate often arises because of misunderstanding. Religion, in the Western sense, implies exclusive belonging, creeds, and institutions. But in India, Dharma is not exclusive. It is a way of life, a path of alignment with cosmic order. Yoga, as part of Dharma, was never meant to exclude, but to guide. Myths of yogis in forests did not ask about creed or caste. They opened the path to whoever persevered. The 64 yoginis included both terrifying and benevolent aspects, embracing the full spectrum of existence. The Siddhas often came from outcast backgrounds, showing that yoga's power was not reserved for the elite. These mythological inclusions suggest that yoga has always been both particular and universal, rooted and transcendent. Still, tensions remain in modern times. Some Hindu voices argue that yoga has been appropriated, stripped of its roots, turned into mere exercise, and detached from its sacred heritage. They point out, rightly, that yoga without its Hindu context risks losing its depth, becoming only physical postures without philosophy or spirituality. On the other hand, practitioners worldwide often insist that yoga speaks to them beyond religion, that they can practice meditation, breathwork, and asana without adopting Hindu rituals. Both positions reflect truths. Yoga is undeniably born of Hindu soil, but its fruit can be shared universally. Myth itself supports this, since the wisdom of yoga was never confined but always radiated outward. The figure of Krishna provides a useful mythological lens here. In the Gita, he tells Arjuna that all paths, whether devotion, action, or knowledge, ultimately lead to him. This is not a sectarian claim, but a universal one. All sincere effort at union leads to truth. Similarly, Shiva as Adiyogi is not depicted as teaching only Hindus, but all seekers who endure. The universality of yoga lies in its method, not in its mythology alone. Breath, stillness, concentration, and surrender are human capacities, not bound to one culture. Yet the mythology provides the richness, the archetypes, the imagery that inspire and sustain the practice. To sever yoga from Hinduism is to strip it of its roots, but to confine yoga to Hinduism alone is to deny its universal reach. In the modern globalized world, this dual identity of yoga has created both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, yoga studios in cities far from India testify to its universality, with practitioners from all faiths and none finding peace and clarity through it. On the other hand, many are unaware of its mythological depth, of Shiva meditating on Kailash, of sages burning with tapas, of chakras and Kundalini. The myths carry meanings that enrich practice, reminding seekers that yoga is not just posture but a path of transformation. Without these stories, yoga risks becoming shallow. With them, it regains its sacred fire. The truth may lie in embracing both sides. Yoga is Hindu in its origins, inseparable from the myths and philosophies of India. To honor yoga is to honor this heritage, to acknowledge Shiva, Patanjali, the rishis, and the epics. But yoga is also universal, intended from the beginning to transcend boundaries. To practice yoga sincerely is not to appropriate, but to join a lineage of seekers, to participate in a human quest for union that belongs to all. Myth itself offers the bridge, showing that while the forms are rooted in India, the essence is boundless, like the sun that rises for all. Ultimately, yoga as myth and practice asks us to move beyond division. Religion may separate by creed, but yoga unites by experience. When the breath steadies, when the mind becomes still, when the inner self shines, these states do not belong to any one faith, but to humanity itself. Yet the stories of gods and sages remind us of the journey, of the fire, of the discipline required. To hold yoga as both Hindu and universal is to respect its roots while sharing its fruits. It is to see that the path of union, though born in a particular land, was always meant to embrace all lands, all people, all beings. Part 9. Modern Yoga's Forgotten Origins, from Ashrams to Instagram. The yoga practiced today in gleaming studios, shared on social media, and marketed as wellness culture often looks worlds apart from the yoga described in myths and scriptures. Contemporary yoga emphasizes postures, flexibility, and fitness, and while these have value, they represent only a fragment of the vast tradition rooted in myth, philosophy, and spiritual discipline. The journey of yoga from ancient forests and ashrams to Instagram feeds is a story of both continuity and forgetting. It shows how an ancient path of liberation, born in the fire of Tapas and narrated in the epics, has been reshaped by modernity into a global phenomenon, sometimes celebrated, sometimes diluted. To understand this transformation is to see both what has been preserved and what risks being lost. In its origins, yoga was inseparable from mythology and spiritual pursuit. Shiva as Adiyogi, seated on the Himalayan peak, embodies yoga as cosmic revelation. Patanjali, descending as the serpent-born sage, systematized it into the sutras. The epics taught yoga as discipline for warriors, sages, and rulers. These mythic roots gave yoga its power. It was a path to union, to transcendence, to liberation from suffering. The physical practices of asana and pranayama were part of this larger whole, but never the entirety. They were stepping stones toward meditation, concentration, and samadhi, where the self dissolved into the infinite. The ashram was the natural setting, where disciples lived under guidance, engaging in daily discipline, service, mantra, and meditation, far removed from commerce or spectacle. The colonial encounter and the rise of modern India transformed yoga's trajectory. In the 19th century, figures like Swami Vivekananda carried yoga abroad, presenting it as a science of the mind and a universal path beyond religion. Vivekananda emphasized Raja Yoga, meditation, and self-realization, drawing from mythology but framing it for a modern audience. Around the same time, Hatha Yoga, once associated with ascetics and esoteric practices, began to be reshaped. Teachers like Krishnamacharya, in the early 20th century, integrated postural yoga with elements of gymnastics, physical culture, and discipline, suited to a modern, nationalist India seeking strength and identity. This shift laid the foundation for what would later become global yoga. From Krishnamacharya's lineage came influential figures such as B.K.S. Iyengar, K. Pattabhi Jois, and T.K.V. Desikachar, each of whom popularized different styles of yoga. Iyengar yoga with its emphasis on alignment, Ashtanga Vinyasa with its flowing sequences, and therapeutic yoga adapted to individual needs. These teachers carried yoga beyond India, where it flourished in Europe and America. In this process, much of the mythology was left behind, not out of rejection, but to make yoga accessible to diverse cultures. The emphasis shifted increasingly toward physical practice, asana, which was easy to teach, observe, and measure, while the deeper roots of philosophy, tapas, meditation, and myth receded into the background. By the mid to late 20th century, yoga had become part of the counterculture in the West. Figures like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi attracted global attention, especially when the Beatles visited his ashram in Rishikesh. Yoga was associated with peace, spirituality, and exploration of consciousness, often linked to meditation and Eastern wisdom. Yet even here, the tension between universality and rootedness remained. Some embraced yoga as a universal science of the spirit, while others saw it as a cultural or religious import. Still, the mythological roots were faintly present, carried by teachers who spoke of Shiva, Patanjali, and Krishna, though often translated into psychological or philosophical terms. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, yoga underwent another transformation: commercialization. Studios proliferated, teacher trainings became industries, and yoga was packaged as fitness, stress relief, or lifestyle. On Instagram, images of advanced postures against scenic backdrops became symbols of yoga, emphasizing aesthetics over depth. Brands sold yoga mats, clothes, and retreats. For many, yoga became a synonym for stretching, disconnected from meditation, ethics, or myth. What was once a path to liberation was rebranded as a wellness product, often stripped of its spiritual fire. This popularization expanded yoga's reach enormously, but also risked obscuring its roots. The irony is that even as modern yoga forgets its origins, those origins remain present, often unacknowledged. Every posture practiced in a studio is linked to hatha yoga traditions shaped by siddhas and yogis. Every breath exercise echoes pranayama described in the Upanishads. Every meditation app draws unconsciously from Patanjali's path of concentration and stillness. Even the idea of balance, discipline, and mindfulness that pervades modern yoga culture comes from the ancient recognition of tapas and dhyana. The roots are always there, but without myth, they risk being seen as mere techniques rather than sacred practices aimed at transformation. Mythology offers a corrective to this forgetfulness. When we recall that asana was meant to steady the body for meditation, we realize that yoga is not just about flexibility, but about stillness. When we remember Shiva meditating on Kailash, we see that yoga is not just posture, but union with cosmic silence. When we reflect on Arjuna receiving the Gita's teachings on a battlefield, we understand that yoga is not escape from struggle, but clarity within it. When we think of Parvati performing tapas to unite with Shiva, we recognize yoga as devotion and discipline together. The myths give context, reminding us that yoga's purpose is liberation, not performance. At the same time, yoga's modern evolution is not entirely a betrayal of its roots. The fact that millions practice yoga worldwide, even if only as exercise, keeps the tradition alive. Many begin with posture and breath, and gradually seek deeper dimensions. A student who first approaches yoga for fitness may discover meditation, philosophy, or devotion later. In this sense, the modern, commercialized form may act as a gateway, imperfect but significant. The myths can still reach those who are open, providing depth to those who look beyond surface images. The challenge, then, is not to reject modern yoga, but to reconnect it with its forgotten origins. Teachers and practitioners can honor the myths by telling the stories of Shiva as Adiyogi, of Patanjali as the serpent sage, of the Yoginis and Siddhas, of Krishna guiding Arjuna. They can weave the 8 limbs into practice, reminding students that yoga is ethics, discipline, breath, and meditation, not only posture. They can teach that tapas is the fire that sustains practice, and that samadhi, union, is the goal. By restoring mythology, yoga regains its wholeness, body, mind, and spirit aligned. In the digital age, even platforms like Instagram can serve this restoration. Alongside pictures of postures, stories of myth and philosophy can be shared. Short teachings about chakras, Kundalini, or the epics can circulate. Modern practitioners need not abandon contemporary culture to access ancient wisdom. They can infuse it with depth. The mythological roots of yoga can serve as inspiration, enriching practice rather than limiting it. What matters is not nostalgia for the past, but honoring the essence, that yoga is a path to union, liberation, and transformation. Ultimately, the story of yoga from ashrams to Instagram is a reminder of both loss and possibility. It shows how a sacred path can be reduced to commodity, but also how it can survive and adapt. The myths continue to whisper beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered. When practitioners breathe consciously, sit in stillness, or surrender in devotion, they unknowingly touch the same fire that burned in the sages of old. To awaken fully, they must remember the stories, the roots, the meaning. Only then does yoga reveal itself not as exercise or spectacle, but as the ancient and universal path of union.